thanks for coming this evening. This is a great collaboration between the Grange and the Historical Society. And I think I know most of you, but I'm Sue Long, the Grange Master. Yeah. And also your projectionist. And this is Colin Walker. So I just need to, we're getting funding from the LCAT grant. So is anyone from off island here? Okay, great. And are you staying in, are you outside of San Juan County?
Well, I have a house here, but I don't live here.
Okay, I think that's yes. Do you live in Washington? Okay. I did not know you're staying in your house. Okay. Yeah, one person. No. Oh, I live here. I live in Edmonton. Okay. All right, cool.
And Kayla was moved here from Mexico.
All right. Great. All right. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention first, since you're here, is our next Grange event is October 19th. It's a quilt show with the Enchanted Quilters, and they have created 2 new beautiful barn quilts that we're going to raffle off, and also 2 regular quilts, right, Edie?
Yeah, same design as the wooden ones, but in fabric.
But in fabric. And so we're going to sell raffle tickets, and we're going to draw on November 14th at Story here. And if you don't know what that is, it's like a participant-driven storytelling evening. It's kind of modeled after the moth. And there's a theme. What's that theme, Jody? I think we're going to have the theme be creativity that night. So think of a story. Creation will be the theme. Anyways, okay, so we're going to start a little panel, and I thought I'd start by reading something, using my glasses, of course, now, that Georgie Kokoro sent me about her experience being an extra. She said, I was doing some quick grocery shopping in our original Lopez market and was in a hurry as the kids were little. Rio was 2 and my daughter Liz 6, and it's not easy shopping with kids at that age. So I was in a hurry to just get what I needed and out the door when some lady came up to me and told me I would make a great news reporter. I thought she was nuts until she explained she was from a talent agency looking for extras to work on the Free Willy 2 set to begin filming on Lopez. So with that sounding a little more convincing, I agreed. B. Callahan did much babysitting while I worked as a news reporter with a fake camera swinging on my neck and small handheld tape recorder in the other hand, playing my role as an obnoxious news reporter. I didn't have any lines to say, but was in the character because I'm a professional camera woman in real life. No problem. There are 2 particular scenes where I was shot closer than the usual background, but still blurred, but close enough to see. I was running on a ramp, and the other a close-up clear shot of my butt. I would have preferred a nice shot of my face rather than my butt, but that's Hollywood. That is when I still had a nice butt back then, and I ate 30 Who is that? Georgie Kokoro. She used to be with Ronnie Lopez and is the mother of Rio Lopez. Okay, just a little bit more.
And Elizabeth.
and Elizabeth, who lives on Orcas now. She says, I met Elizabeth Pena on the set, though extras are not allowed to talk to any of the actors. So I didn't approach her while working. I met her later at the Islander, where she invited me to join her table. A very humble and caring human, aside from being an award-winning gorgeous actress, and the invite made the rest of my day. I'll add, she said, I miss Elizabeth, and I'll talk about that in a second, as she is sorely missed by everyone. And I can only imagine the void for her family. Elizabeth Pena married Hans Rolla here on the island. Hans still has a part-time home on the island and lives in Seattle, the other part. Elizabeth went on to be in many movies. Unfortunately, she passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. So, and when she was on the island, she got to know all of us. She became a part of this island. So that's what I wanted to add. And one more little anecdote. Sam Pottinger is in the film. Him and Hank Muska are, they're in quite a few shots of them in a skiff. And Sam couldn't make it because he's sick. But he gave me a little anecdote. He says, I remember someone made t-shirts, I think it was Kelly Balcom, who works with whales, and the t-shirt said, I freed my Willy on Lopez Island. So that's all I got for you. So, maybe you guys want to share some of your...
Yeah. Krista and I were directing Camp Nor'Wester back then, and we signed the contract with Warner Brothers, and it was Reed Langenbach, who's got Red Gate Farm, who drew up the contract for the camp and Warner Brothers, and the Warner Brothers attorneys just didn't question anything. They said, whoa, we never would have thought of all that stuff you put in there, and they just signed it. So that started us out, and they came, I can't remember precisely, I'm thinking it was March, and so we didn't have staff training starting until the end of May, so we had a lot of time, but they spent a lot of time there, and there was all kinds of things that happened because we were with them every day, and I don't want to bore you with all the details, but I did meet some of the stars. One time when Sam was getting done shooting a shot with Emmett Walsh, where he ended up in the water, I noticed that everyone who went into the water in that scene got out really quickly. but they all had really thin, wetsuits underneath. And Emmett Walsh, he just stayed out there and he sort of swam around, and then eventually came up to the lodge and started taking all of his gear off. And Sam was joking with him about peeing in his wetsuit and stuff like that. That's how Sam is. And Sam did give me a story. He's sick and he couldn't come, but he had one story and one observation. He said he and Hank were in the Iosa skiff, and they were trying to trap the what is called little spot, one of the young whales, and Hank was slamming the oar down, trying to make noise, and he said he and Hank just kind of got in a giggling fit, and they were just laughing. They just couldn't stop. They thought it was hilarious. Well, it was a serious scene because they're trying to trap these whales, and they did a couple of takes, and then the director called Sam on the radio and said, "You guys, you have to get serious. It's costing about $5,000 a minute to shoot these, and you got to get serious." And they were kind of like, "Yeah, okay, sure." And he said, "Just imagine that if we shoot this and it's a good take, just imagine you'll get $100,000 at the end of it." And Sam goes, "Make it $1 million." And he goes, "Okay, $1 million, whatever." So, and then Sam wanted to point out in one of the scenes, I think the Iosa skiff, and he is silhouetted, and Julie Knight is in the front of the skiff looking back, and he just wanted to point out that Julie had made all the arrangements for IOSA to provide the skiff and other stuff, and it really was a good injection of funds for IOSA. Yeah. And there was all kinds of stuff that happened. There was a huge crew. They had the Teamsters there with their big generators, and they were mostly sleeping in the cabs of their truck during the day with their feet sticking out the window. All they had to do was get the truck there, and then that's pretty much what they did. And then 2 or 3 days later, maybe they'd move somewhere. So they're getting paid Teamster dollars to do that. That was kind of funny. And they had painters and decorators and, site managers and all that kind of stuff. Their painters, we had, there was a carpentry crew that was building all kinds of stuff, and they built up panels in the lodge. It was supposed to look like a campground, and so this family was coming up to camp and enjoy the site. And they hired a family from, I think they're down from Centralia. It was a husband and wife, and they had kids that worked with them in this carpentry crew. And the wife drove in the camp one morning, and she got out in the pickup and she went to shut the gate, and she shut the gate and her pickup got itself stuck in reverse, and it backed in and it shoved her through the gate and broke the gate. And she crawled, and she ended up having a broken hip after that. She ended up crawling all the way to the pickup to turn it off with a broken hip. And then, so then they got their crew on that. I remember calling them at the hospital, and she was fine. She had a good recovery and everything. But the crew went and made a new gate, and the way they painted it, from 5 feet away, it looked like it was 20 or 30 years old. Brand new lumber, and they just painted it. They just knew how to do that stuff. I did meet, what's her name, Jane Atkinson. She was quite nice. I had seen her on a show a long time ago called A Year in the Life that was supposed to take place in Edmonds. And we were talking to Elizabeth Pena too. I'm trying to think. There's all kinds of stories, but I don't mind boring with details. Patrick was there, and he had his boat there.
Okay.
So Chris has got a good story. Yeah.
I don't believe what year that was.
94, I believe.
The movie came out in 94, and I think it was 93. Filmed the year before.
We started filming in April of '94 and finished in August of '94. I looked it up for a pan.
You should be there. I'd make 2 comments, I guess. I think it was the most interesting, similar to the gate story. They came in and just created things. We had carvings down on that site, totems that Bill Holm had done, lots of interesting pieces of art down there, and they needed a new totem, so they carved one out of styrofoam and painted it and put it up, and it all happened like, wow. And I thought, Bill Holm should talk to them. So it took a lot of time. But it looked very real from the filming that they did. And we had another totem figure we called Freddie, and he sat on a point. He was holding a copper, and his hand was extended, but he didn't look. They wanted him to look older, but newer, because he looked too old the way he was, and so they hired Bill Holm's daughter, Karen Holm, to come, and she painted him. We did paint him periodically anyway, but she painted him to look old, but not as old as he was, not new. And she did it, and it was just kind of like magic. So we just kept seeing things like that happening in the months that they were there. They needed something, they just created it. It just happened. A fishing cabin was built, and I'm not even sure it got made in the film, but it was sitting there with all its little nets and stuff hanging, but it was just there. But the story I do love to tell is we had Bubba's
Barbecue.
Barbecue was there, so they eat, if they're not working, they're eating and sitting around and trying to wait till something happens. So they had tons of good food there. And because we were directing the camp then, we were at our office, we got screened in because they didn't want the reflection of the glass, so we kind of lived inside under light most of the spring. But anyway, the barbecue was there, and they would have one big meal a day, whatever shift they were on. So it might be a midday meal, it might be an 8 p.m. meal. But Bubba was making these meals, and he made like 3 or 4 main course dishes that you could just come up and order, and they came everything. And then to supplement that, they had the craft tent, and they had these two long salad bars, and then all these tables, so people could just come in and as they rotated the cruise. Well, we had 30 head of horses on that property, and we told them, we're not gonna trap them because they can't stay in a corral and march through June. So they're gonna be loose. So that was fine. And there was nothing big until the day that some of the horses figured out there was salad bar. Meandering through the tent, and they kind of like sampling. I was like, and I'm like, huh? So that was like, it felt kind of nice that that happened, because it was a huge impact, just watching what they did. I don't know what happened, to the rest of our island, because we were with them during the day or nights, depending on when they were working. But I know they had a big impact, housing-wise, many, many ways. They brought a lot of people here, so we all survived and gained about 10 pounds before camp started. That usually happens during the summer, but bye-bye. Things were very good.
You never knew really what they were going to do. It depended on how they would go over, I think what they called the dailies. They would look and see what they had shot, and then they would decide if they needed to reshoot stuff. And then I didn't really, they gave me a copy of the script, but I don't think I really had time to read it. But they had to shoot a sunrise shot, and they ended up doing it at night, and it was like 2 in the morning, but they had these huge lights, just massive lights, and just turned them on, and everything just lit up, and birds started singing and stuff. I mean, it really seemed like a sunrise. That was kind of odd. And when they had those lights on, these some type of they're like a tube worm or something. They would come out and they'd swim around in the bay, and I've never seen those before. They would swim all over the place.
But you were an extra?
He has a boat.
Hi, my name's Patrick O'Neill, and I own a boat that's a purse seiner, if you know what that is. It's about a 60-foot boat. And I sent pictures of my boat into the Free Willy people, and they already had some boats, and they thought they had it covered. But the purse seine industry has a kind of a long connection with the orca thing, I guess. The first Namu was captured up in BC in a cove where there's a cannery, salmon cannery, and using boats very much like the St. Janet. And then we're watching Free Willy 2, right?
Yes. St. Janet is.
Free Willy 1 opens with some seiners kind of, kill those fish, waving gaffs at the whales and stuff, and they're closing the net. A lot like the first, I think they put like metal fencing across the inlet to capture the first whale. So anyways, and then Free Willy 3 actually depicts the fishing industry in a really bad light. And that was, getting involved with it. I feel like Free Willy 2, they pictured the fishing industry in a fairly neutral way. We're kind of being duped, like everyone else, by the oil companies in this movie. And so, like, the bad guy, Emmett, he was an interesting guy. Because I was on the water, I was a technical, and that was really a fun way to be out there. I could actually stand behind the cameras and look at the monitors and mingle at the floating buffet with the stars. And so it was a really neat experience and fun to see how it's all put together. And I felt like you never knew what was going to happen from day to day. There was definitely a kind of bait and switch thing, and keep you around, and then they wouldn't need you, but they wanted you around, and you kind of had to roll with it. And but some of the most interesting guys I thought were the guys that made the animatronic whales, and they had this pretty industrial machine barge, and so every night they would have to lift the animatronic machines out of the water and take them into the shop, and and clean them and wash them, get the salt water off of them and go through them and get everything. And they were really quite fascinating. They had pressurized air to them so they could blow their stack and so they could adjust the flotation of the whale. They had pretty heavy hydraulic lines running to them that ran their motors to make them propel them through the water. They also had
hanging out on the dock. When you work in the morning, they'd be laying on their dock.
They also had
these workers sitting there.
Yeah. They had electrical wires to actuate different aspects to get the body to move. So it's an aluminum frame covered with fiberglass, and then foam sculpted, and then covered with foam rubber. And there was one on they call it Willy on a stick. It just went straight up and sat on the bottom in shallow water and just went straight up on a hydraulic ram. It was just the head, the spy hawk.
It was spy hawk, yeah.
But it was really something to see these things go swimming across the bay and hit the end of their lines, these heavy, all these electrical, air, hydraulic lines, they hit the end of that line. So when you're watching the movie, one of the things I always do is like, you're just kind of go, is that an animatronic whale or is that a real footage that's cut back and forth?
They looked real.
But these guys were from San Francisco. There was 5 or 7 of them. They had a really neat business. They were very successful about doing other movies, and they'd done a few, and this was a big one for them. Pretty well, because the first movie had been successful, this one there wasn't a lot of money getting thrown around. They didn't know exactly what they were doing, but they were throwing money at it.
We tried to get some of that money. At the end, they wanted to stay, and we were running the camp, and we had about 90 staff showing up in a couple days to start. And they were like, well, we just need a couple weeks or a week. And Paul's like, well, we can't. We're going to be putting up teepees and like, no, we can do this. What's it going to take? And what's it going to take? And finally, I don't know what you proposed to them.
I said, if you put $100,000 into the scholarship fund, we'll let you stay 2 weeks. They packed up and left the next day.
They were kind of... They were funny. It was a funny one.
The money thing was kind of funny because something like we had a contract, they were going to use the property and the dock and stuff, and then all of a sudden, oh, we'd like to use those sailboats. And I said, well, that's not part of the deal. Well, what'll it take, kind of thing. And so it's like, okay, you can use the sailboats if you get qualified people to sail them. And that's what, like Jeff Hanks, I think, did that. And then they wanted to use the canoes, and then not only use the canoes, then they wanted to paint the canoes because they didn't want them to look so bright and shiny and all that. So they ended up painting all the canoes, and it was just always one thing after another. It went that way the whole time. And sometimes they would say, "What is it going to take? What is it going to take?" And finally, at the end, it was like, you just have to leave.
So when were the other movies filmed? I think Astoria, or part of it was filmed in Astoria.
You say when or where?
Where?
Oh yeah, there was some in Astoria, some in Friday
Friday
Harbor.
Harbor.
Yeah, so that's one thing I want to
The
mention.
big final fire scenes
Yeah.
were over in Friday Harbor. They had a big hulk over there.
I didn't really feel that they used the most out of the campsite because Superior Peninsula is quite beautiful. They had one shot where a character is walking over what we call Chapel Rock, big view out under Mud Bay and stuff, and they just had these tight shots of that person walking and didn't show really the mossy rocks and the trees and everything. So, yeah. Anyway, we should.
I just wanted to mention a couple more. Hank Muska was there with his boat, the Zonta, which you'll see in the movie. It's a trawler. There was another boat that was a brand new, very expensive fish boat, but it was more of a yacht. And he was running by the end of the point one day and at full speed hit a rock right there in front of the cameras. I don't think that made the movie. But I wanted to mention also my crew, which Phil Goodner was super stoked to be in it. So I'm not sure if he's in the movie. You might catch a glimpse of him. And running the same skiff was Christopher O'Brien. And Christopher is definitely in the movie. He's running the power skiff while we're trying to catch the net the baby whale. Horrible people, but we were doing out there. It's terrible. But we thought we were saving them. We thought we were saving them. We weren't going to throw away the key on them. So Christopher's in it, and you were talking about Emmett and the wetsuit and stuff. We actually had a hot water hose hooked up, and when Emmett got out of the water, because there was a couple takes, we were like putting hot water down his wetsuit and spraying him down. And we were treating the stars for him. He was a really interesting guy. He's actually quite personable.
Yeah.
But, and at the point, so the whale's hanging up there and Emmett's in this skiff and he's holding this line and it doesn't make any logical sense, but he pulls the line and the whale gets released and he gets dumped in the water. And at that point, there's a bunch of cameras and crew all kind of on my boat. And an assistant producer said, go ahead out there and help him. And it was not scripted, but at that point, I made this move out into the frame of the camera, which I knew pretty much at that point what was going on. And I helped the bad guy up out of the water. So you'll see me in the movie with a turquoise bandana and a Patagonia sweater on. Real briefly. Cameo helping Emmett up out of the water. And
Emmett said he had gone to a summer camp on Lake Champlain. And he just really liked being there.
yeah. Nice. Anyways, yeah, we should watch it.
Okay, I'm just gonna add one thing, okay? I wasn't in the movie. I was working at the school, but I was really jealous of everyone who was in the movie. But I'm no longer jealous because one of the things Georgie mentioned was how much the extras got paid. $4.50 an hour. Oh. That was the minimum wage. So.
And they sat around forever.
Yeah.
I don't think they got paid when they sat around.
Yeah.
I have to say one more thing too, and over the decades now, it's weird, but I think the movie was very popular with native people up and down the North Coast and Southeast Alaska. And it had a certain thing in the fishing industry, or at least with fishermen's kids or something, but it was not uncommon. It hasn't been that many years since I'm running the boat in the middle of the night somewhere up some channel up the Inside Passage, and someone comes on the radio and goes, "Hey, Free Willy, pick me up." I'm not kidding you. People, they see the name of the boat on the AIS, and they know that they recognize the St. John from the movie. That's happened for decades. So it's kind of haunted my life.
Hey Patrick, one last thing.
Yeah, Bob.
Did that slow you guys going north?
Yeah, we missed the first couple of openings at Hidden Falls, and we would have done better.
Well, of course.
To the addition. But it was really
Why don't you have a question? Okay, Leslie has a comment.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to talk about the part that hasn't been talked about yet, which was the security queen.
Oh.
And I was hired to be a night watchman on the set. And Sean was 11 and Leah was 9. And we would go down in one of my old cars, I can't remember which car I had at the time, but we parked right at the outside of the gate, park our car, and they would often go to sleep in the seats because this was during the nighttime. And part of our duty was to make sure no one came through the gate. And then another part of my duty was at some point during the night, there was kind of a routine that we were to walk through the whole grounds. Walk through the whole grounds with where all the sets were, through the cafeteria, not cafeteria, but kitchen area, all the stuff with our flashlights, you know, just to be a presence there. And it's very fond memories, and we also got to be there sometimes in the daytime when no one was there. And Sean and Leah got to just prowl around through everything, every set we could go and snoop through. And it was really funny, there was this one set that was up on the rocks looking out towards the bay where the campsite was. And everything there was just brand spanking new. They had brought it in and set up this camp where the family was going to be camping. And we got to just look at everything. And it was a huge memory for my kids. And I have pictures of them with the anatomic whales and all this kind of stuff. But funny story. One last thing I want to say about it, because I could go on, because we had such a blast there. But, and I do remember the horses going down into the food area. But one of my friends was a night watchman there as well, and her duty was to walk through the camp, and she was there by herself. And she was a little nervous about walking through the camp, so she had this trick where she would put a flashlight in each hand and spread them out like this. So when she was walking, if there was anybody that was creepy down there that wasn't supposed to be there, they would think there were two people walking. So that was a funny thing too. But it was great, and there were quite a few people hired as security people for that film.
Also, there's the old lumber yard. They would have people there, because I know Holly was there.
For security?
For security, yeah.
Okay, we'll have questions afterwards, and let me know if the sound is okay and all that.
Louder.
Once I get going here. Louder?